So this is a complete run through of the basic operation of the SingleShot system. So here I'm just going to load the executable. This is the client, which should be installed on your computer, and this is for version 1.46, I think, 4.5. Anyway, I can't quite see. So here we're waiting for the server to load up, but as it's loading, we'll just do a brief tour of the basic sort of functions of the system. So this video is probably about 12.5 minutes, and we'll go through a complete sort of setup and ARM, but we won't delve too deeply into some of the more complex or functionality, which I'll do specialised videos for those going forward. So you can see it's a maximise and minimise type screen. You can resize it to a certain extent. So I think at this point I'm just turning on the server. So now if you'll notice, just bringing it back in so we can see the entire screen, you'll notice there's an IP address there. So if you've got a system that's got loads of multiple IP addresses, this picks up the first network it finds and it looks for the server on that network. So the cause of common problems is that your server is not being able to see. So if your IP address doesn't match up, that will be it. I find that quite a useful addition. It's new to this version. So here you've got your standard sort of file dialogues, experiments dialogues, belt boxes. So that's all additional type of information there. And then you've got your version number, and then the run ID. So this is unique to each client, so we can have multiple clients on each system. So this is generated uniquely every time you run it. So when you connect to a server, it tells you that that's the only thing. So now if you open the versions, you can see the issues that have been cured on that version, the additional functionality that's been added. Okay, going back to the run ID, yes, you can run multiple clients on your network. So here the server has come to life. So it's gone through its boot up, and this is a all pre-set up configured server, so it goes straight into waiting for connect. And you can see the little watchdog is going and the server ID is there. So you can have multiple servers. We've run 8 maximum, but there's nothing in the software to stop you running more than that. There's a context sensitive menu system depending on the status of that server. So when you right click, you'll get a different menu for each. Now when you connect, you can see it's bringing in the serial numbers for each of the cards. Once that's done, you see it'll enable again, and it's connected idle will be its state. And then you'll just see on the different tabs the different hardware, so it tells you all the cards, their particular settings, their default states. So then we go to the channels, you'll notice that they're disabled, and you'll also notice there's a rack list there and some rack details. So if you double click on that, you can see here's the details of the rack, and you can see the IP address matches and there's the version number of the software. So these version numbers are very important. You need to take note of those to tell me if you have an issue, what versions you're running, what version of servers you're running, because old servers will not necessarily run with new software. Generally you'll get an update with a complete pack, a new server to install. So here we can adjust all of the vertical settings of all the cards. You don't have to, you can select which ones you want to do. And you can see there's different card types, so you can have several different types of cards. It's pretty limited at the moment, but that's just because I have those ones to test. So 5105s, 5160s and 5162s are the types we got. You see here's the time base, and there's a couple of options for the time base. Some people like to Me, for example, like to know the samples and the start points and the actual length. Other people like to know the window of the experiment that you're doing. Either way, it comes out with the same thing. So the boxes have got pretty standard sort of things. Again, you can set one card up, or you can, and cards can be set differently. And a lot of those settings are really dependent on the specification of the card. So now that we've set up the verticals and they've enabled, you can see that those channels are enabled, and you can just bring them in, bring all of them, and you can see the graph going. You can see that's updating. And there's other bits of information there that you can pick up. So now we're going to have a look at the setting of the trigger, and because it's got a synchronized card, you can have it system synced, which is chassis to chassis, or you can have it independent. To be quite honest, I've not seen much difference. Probably on repeated firings you may find there's a minor difference, but it cuts down wiring complexity considerably not having the system sync. So here you've got all the different trigger types available per the card. You can have digital, which will be on the PFIs on the card, which are the little SMB connectors. SMB connectors. Or it can be an analog, and it's context sensitive, so if you select analog you'll get a different set of answers, questions to answer. Then you set it, and then you go to the next one. You can actually save it as default, but we'll look at that in another day. And when you're all done, just press OK. So again, this would be doing it to multiple servers if you've got multiple servers. And that's as easy as doing that. Then it goes through the settings to that server. You can see these are all sort of server states that it's going through. So it's because we want to be very careful. It's fairly time consuming as it's going through it, because it's just making sure that each setting that we send is correct. And you see now that it's triggered. So now it's triggered. You can see this is not updating. That's because it's waiting for a trigger. So if I press my pulse generator, you can see here we have a trigger. If you zoom in, you'll begin to see how I can have so many channels with so much data. I cheat. So this is actually not very well aliased, as it were, so you haven't got a good indication of what the waveform is. But if you press this button, which is the refresh button, it tells the server that we want to zoom in a bit, and then you trigger it again. You can actually start looking at actual data, and you can see this is a much better reading, much more, many more samples. And then we can do that again and get even better until we're at the full sample rate. There you go. So you just gradually zoom in if that's important. So this is you're supposed to be setting up all your measurements, and you're making sure your synchronization and your wire lengths and things like that are all correct. So you're using this, you're not actually taking this data and saving it, you're just looking at it. So, and there's various tools for doing that. Now you notice that this button, the armed button, is coming on and off. So we're trying to make all the multiple racks synchronized correctly. We limit you to pressing the arm button when it's in check acquire. I think it's in check acquire now. You might notice it's doing a read temperature. I may change this in the future, but it's also going to quickly take in the rack temperatures, which are the other part of that graph. And finally, you can pull out graphs. So you don't need to drop all of the channels over. You can drop a limited amount, and you can open them up in little pop-out graphs. So I don't know, for example, a particular type of sensor, you could have a graph for that. A particular area of the experiment, you can have a graph for that. So you can pull all of these out and make your screen pretty with them. And then all this data can be stored away as an experiment and reloaded as an experiment. So now we've pressed ARM, and it's just getting the system status. So this is it checking. Now where it's red, it means there's an issue. You can see there's an exclamation mark as well against that server. Again, thinking of multiple servers, this is kind of useful. So you click on that, and you whatever server you click on, and you see the reason this is whinging is that I've not sent my cards back to be calibrated because I'm lazy. But here you can see there's various things like the temperature of the racks, temperature of the cards. Some of these things will actually stop the test going to the next stage. So the currently set for the disk size. So if it hasn't got enough disk space for an experiment, then it won't let you do an experiment. And you'll just have to clean the disk out. There are tools on the user in the filing section for dealing with all of that. So you can see it's armed, and now I've pressed the trigger button, and now it's pulling the data off of each of the servers. In this case there's only one. And this can be up to, well, depending on the card and the amount of RAM on the card, it can be 256 million samples per channel. So that's a lot of data. That could be 2 gig per card. So if you've got a rack full of cards, about 15 racks, you have to make sure you've got some hard drive. Next, it will bring the file in TDMS format. This is compressed TDMS, essentially to try to make it as small as possible. So this is new in this version. We've got a quick view, and there is a bug that was raised, or an issue that was raised, and it's to do with if you do this again, it doesn't update. And that's because this is done on a value change. I will fix it for the next time round, but if you just want to see the new graph, just click on a new channel and then click back on the channel that you want, and that will just fire the event and you'll see the data you need. Now you'll notice that there's no data coming here. This is because we're purely concentrating on the data to be acquired and pulled back as a TDMS file. We're not bringing it up to the screen. That's what I've given that other screen for, just to allow you zoom in, because this is, it's just too difficult as a user interface and too much data. Okay, so now we've acquired data. Let's have a quick look in the data file. So this is stored under users, public, single shot, TDMS. This is configurable, but it's under that name. Again, that name is you can change it as long as it's unique, then you can change it. But there's your TDMS file. Now you can also post-process those TDMS files to create text files and various other things. But again, that's another advanced option. That's it. Close it by exiting.